Daniel Sloss's X is one of the best comedy sets I have ever seen, probably tied with Chris Gethard's Career Suicide for the best I've attended, and I remain furious that it is not available for everyone to see because Netflix has yet to pick it up for distribution. Hopefully that will happen soon. But if it takes a few years, wouldn't be the first time. Case in point, Now, currently being performed by Sloss in New York City at the Soho Playhouse. It's not new. It's actually from 2017, the show he made between Jigsaw and X. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week I Review. You can call me definitely not a psychopath. And today I am talking about Daniel Sloss's Now. Sloss came out with notes, warning us that he's basically relearning the 2-year-old show for a taping he will be doing in just a few weeks, and that he didn't expect to refer back, but wanted the option just in case things got dicey. He didn't need them, but it reminded me that he had actually mentioned this show the last time I saw him perform, specifically calling out the fact that Netflix didn't pick it up when it grabbed Dark and Jigsaw. Now is about sociopathy, driven by the widespread accusation by folks that he is afflicted. It makes a lot of sense that this is where his mind would go after Jigsaw, a show that has been responsible for more than 100 divorces and many, many thousands of breakups, every one of which he is proud. And in many ways, it feels like an expansion of its predecessor. For example, the offhand remark there about using a person's preference for pulpy orange juice as a pretext for leaving them turns here into a 10-minute rant about the evils of such a thing, which involves him saying the phrase, "Who chews juice?" literally 7 times in a row. The moment where he said he wasn't molested as a kid and so can't use that as material. Well, he found some related material. And that's the not funny part of the show that always comes towards the end, though to be honest, it is a lot funnier than I had expected given the subject matter, and also funnier than that in his other shows. I've always had a deep fascination with psychopaths. On multiple occasions, I've kind of wished I was one, because it would have made some sort of traumatic emotional experiences a whole lot easier to deal with. But people don't really seem to use that term anymore. It's all about sociopaths now. I blame Shane Dawson. The distinction between them is muddy at best, if there is one at all. What Sloss says is good enough for this video. Psychopaths just are, while sociopaths must be made. Big disclaimer. I am not a mental health professional, just a slightly more than casually curious observer and big fan of John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test. Psychopaths are wired differently, and I mean that literally. Based on prison studies of diagnosed inmates, a psychopath's amygdala, the thing that makes emotions happen, it's kind of non-functional. It isn't the result of trauma or abuse, it just is. But diagnosis doesn't happen through scientific experimentation, and there are people with less effective amygdalas who are not psychopaths. See the fascinating brain scan sequence from Free Solo. Instead, it is done by using Canadian psychologist Dr. Robert Hare's Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or PCL-R. The PCL-R is a list of 20 potentially problematic traits, each rated on a scale from 0 to 2, making for a total of 40 possible points. While some of them seem to be more clearly diagnostic than others, the threshold is high, 30 points. But you want that to be the case, since the PCL-R is typically used during criminal proceedings. So it's kind of arguable whether psychopathy is a mental illness at all. Maybe sociopathy is? The DSM-5, the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, features something called antisocial personality disorder, which is close enough. So unfortunately, the next 20 seconds, I was talking about the criterion from the DSM-4 as opposed to those from the DSM-5, which are much more extensive. I didn't want to put incorrect information in the video, especially since it doesn't really matter in the bigger picture. This is a review of a comedy show, and I'm about to get back to the review of the comedy show. Thank you for your patience. And now we return to our regularly scheduled programming. Sloss took a different test than either to prepare for now, one with 15 questions. I don't know what it was, but he said that 3 was typical, while 10 was sociopathic. He scored a 7, which is interesting. He then asked the audience a question, telling our room of 150 or so that at most 25 people would get it right, and they would do so immediately. The rest of us would be confused by the question itself. It was not, as I had kind of expected, the first question from the Voight-Kampff test. You're in a desert, walking along in the sand, when all of a sudden you look down and you see a tortoise. It's crawling towards you. You reach down, you flip the tortoise over on its back. The tortoise lays on its back, its belly baking in the hot sun, beating its legs, trying to turn itself over. But it can't. Not without your help.
But you're not helping.
What do you mean I'm not helping?
I mean you're not helping. Why is that, Leon?
Instead, it's a story about a funeral that ends in a murder. Why, we are asked, is the murder committed? Between 15 and 25 people raised their hands immediately, and I was trying so hard to figure it out, but I was lost. He asked a young woman a couple rows up who had raised her hand. She got the question right. And when she said the answer, I immediately understood it. But some others still needed to have it explained because it followed a very specific type of logic. Sloss first heard this question when he was 9. His grandmother had seen it in Reader's Digest and as sort of a clickbait precursor, like, only sociopaths will know the answer to this simple question. No one in the family got it, except for him. Sloss asks the woman if she thinks that she's a sociopath. Her male companion, out of turn, says he thinks so. So does a woman on the other side. She does that little hand motion. He tells the woman that the test is bullshit, and she is not a sociopath. I don't know why he was so sure. Whether the test was accurate or not, statistically, at least one of us was. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was the guy next to her who spoke up. He also knew the answer. But despite the framing, there was never really a question about Sloss himself, which is where the timing of this show matters, because now doesn't really fit with the Daniel Sloss that I have seen. But that probably isn't the case for you, the person watching this. Unless you have seen X, which most people have not, you and I keep in mind very different versions of this man. If your Sloss experience begins at Dark and ends at Jigsaw, you know him as the guy with the dead sister who broke up 100 marriages. So when Now drops, in what I assume will be a few months, you will see continuity, maybe even growth. But it does feel like something of a step back seeing it after X. Not in terms of comedy, this show is very, very funny, but what's behind it. That said, I still found a lot of what he talks about in these 75 minutes meaningful. Sloss knows that he is not a sociopath, so he's working out what he is. And he has come to think that he is what I, for a very long time, thought that I was. Purely logical. And that is why he knew the reason for the murder at the end of that Reader's Digest story. Another way to think of logical in this context, though, is coldly calculating, seeing the pieces of the game of life and therefore being able to slot oneself in it where that will be most effective, which, said out loud, sounds kind of sociopathic. On the other end of the spectrum are emotional people, the ones who run after butterflies into traffic. And while that is a bit over the top and doesn't describe me, though there was a stretch that felt like he was speaking directly to Danielle, and I thought it was high freaking hilarious. Looking at her face, she was somewhat less amused, but still clearly enjoying it. I feel like I've become a much more empathetic person. I still have a matter-of-fact way of looking at things that I know can come across as callous or even cruel at times, but I'm also much more aware of the impact that has on other people, and I'm more likely to re-examine my logic. If it still seems right, I will go right ahead, but it's not as cut and dried as it once was. And I think Daniel Sloss feels that way too. That's really the crux of X and why it spoke to me the way that it did. After the show, Sloss came out to see his adoring public. I was one of the first people to notice and walked over, awkwardly standing around as more forward folks asked him for photos. Eventually, he saw me and engaged. I told him that I didn't want a picture, I just wanted to tell him how much X meant to me, and that now was great, and it is, but like X though. He thanked me, and he gave me a hug, and he said, "I'll see you next time." He didn't mean that, of course, he forgot about me before I hit the corner, but so what? It was a wonderfully kind gesture. And he was right, because whenever he comes back, I'll be there. 8.5 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, that's great. If not, I'm sorry. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.